See if you're on.
Are we live now? Okay. I had just one follow-up, and I think Ms. Ferguson also had a very short procedural matter. But just before we call our next witness, we had two questions from Commissioner Irvin that touched on other dockets, and since they were a little bit legal in nature, that's why you see me. The first question was about the My Home Energy report, and there were questions about including that in the monthly bill letters, et cetera. And so the My Home Energy report is part of an EE program, which is governed by this commission through the EE dockets. And the timing and distribution of those letters are, there's some magic to that in terms of our measurement and verification. However, we do commit to get with our experts and file a fully explanatory letter of what those requirements are to fully satisfy the question. That was number one. Number two, there was a question about sales of customer information during the Customer Connect exchange, and Duke can absolutely commit to not selling any personally identifiable information. We also have a code of conduct and regulatory conditions on file with this commission that have some very strict parameters around what we can do with customer data, both on a personal level as well as an aggregate level. It's been a while since we talked about those, but we'll also be happy to file a letter fully explaining what our obligations that we're happy to meet are regarding that matter, and you'll see that from us soon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we'd call David Dawson.
Hang on 1 second. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, regarding our expert, Mr. Wallach, Duke has indicated to us that they do not intend to cross him. Next week, we had a date certain kind of arranged among the parties. We sent an email out this morning, but since a lot of us have not been checking email, I felt it might be appropriate to ask during open hearing if none of the other parties object to stipulating his pre-filed testimony into the record. If not, we ask that the hearing officer ask the commissioners if they have any questions for him and perhaps let us know after the hearing adjourns for the day, and we'd like to have him excused from appearing in person if possible.
Okay. Any of the parties have any objection to that? What's that? Okay, we need a verification, but and we will excuse him.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we call David Doss to the stand, and he's now seated. Mr. Doss, please state your full name and your business address for the record.
My name is David L. Doss.
Punch that button down there in the front. There you go.
Sorry about that. My name is David L. Doss, Jr. My business address is 550 South Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28202.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Business Services as the Director of Electric Utilities and Infrastructure Accounting.
Mr. Doss, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket 11 pages of direct testimony and 4 exhibits consisting of Doss Exhibit 1, which was 4 pages, Doss Exhibit 2, which is 572 pages, Doss Exhibit 3, which is 11 pages, and Doss Exhibit 4, which is 119 pages?
Yes, I did.
Did you also pre-file an errata to your direct testimony on February 11, 2019?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any other changes or corrections to your direct testimony or exhibits?
No.
Are they true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And if you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Doss, did you also cause the pre-filed rebuttal testimony consisting of 7 pages and 1 exhibit, which was 28 pages?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your rebuttal testimony or that exhibit?
No, I do not.
Are they true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
And if asked those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd ask that the pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony of Mr. Doss be copied into the record as if given orally here today.
Mr. Doss's pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also ask that the 4 direct exhibits and 1 rebuttal exhibit be marked for identification.
Okay, the 4 direct exhibits will be, are you going to do them all? Or, let's do the 4 direct exhibits as hearing exhibit number 22, and the 1 rebuttal exhibit is number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Doss, do you have a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I do.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that Mr. Doss summarize his testimony.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I filed direct testimony and rebuttal testimony in this case. In my direct testimony, I discussed the financial position of Duke Energy Carolinas, or the company, or DE Carolinas, at December 31st, 2017, and the actual results of the company's operations for the 12 months ending December 31st, 2017. The company's financial position and operating results and the actual data required under the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's rules and regulations are set forth in my Exhibit 1. I also discussed the amount of the company's nuclear decommissioning costs allocated to the company's South Carolina retail electric operations. Currently, based on the last decommissioning cost and funding report, which demonstrated that the projected decommissioning trust fund balances were sufficient and no additional funding was required, DE Carolinas is not collecting any funds from South Carolina retail customers for decommissioning of nuclear units, and therefore the amount of nuclear decommissioning expense included in DE Carolinas' book amount for depreciation expense is 0 in the test period. DE Carolinas will continue to submit periodic reports to the Commission and ORS updating its decommissioning cost studies and the status of the funding level to ensure that an adequate level of funds remain in the decommissioning trust for the future decommissioning of the company's nuclear units. I also discussed the revised depreciation rates the company is requesting in this proceeding based on the company's revised depreciation study being filed in this docket and included in my Exhibit 2. The depreciation study was prepared by Gannett Fleming Valuation and Rate Consultants, LLC. Notable updates in the depreciation study for production assets include updates to estimates of final plant decommissioning costs for steam, hydraulic, and other production plants, as well as adjusting rates for updated probable generation plant retirement dates. The updated estimates for final decommissioning costs at steam, hydraulic, and other production plants were obtained from the decommissioning cost estimate study prepared by Burns & McDonnell, an external engineering firm, and included in my testimony as DOS Exhibit 4. Exhibit 3 contains the 3 proposed adjustments to the depreciation rates in the depreciation study approved by the North Carolina Utilities Commission in docket number E7 sub 1146 to reflect 1. The use of a 10% contingency for future unknowns and the estimate of future terminal net salvage costs instead of the 20% proposed in the depreciation study. 2, use of a 15-year remaining life for meters that are being retired pursuant to the company's advanced metering infrastructure program instead of the 3-year amortization period proposed in the depreciation study. And 3rd, use of an interim net salvage percentage of 0 instead of the negative 4% interim net salvage percentage proposed in the depreciation study for account 342, which is for fuel holders, producers, and accessories, account 343, which is for prime movers, account 344 for generators, account 345 for accessory electric equipment, and account 346 for miscellaneous power plant equipment. The company believes that these depreciation rates are reasonable for use in this proceeding and requests Commission approval of the revised depreciation rates resulting from the study, subject to the 3 adjustments I just discussed. These depreciation rates form the basis of the company's deferral request for incremental depreciation expense discussed further by DE Carolina's witness Kim Smith. In my rebuttal testimony, I addressed certain portions of the testimony filed by South Carolina Energy Users Committee witness Kevin O'Donnell regarding the appropriate accounting for coal ash retirement obligations. Witness O'Donnell appears to take issue with the fact that DE Carolinas did not establish an asset retirement obligation, or ARO, for coal ash until 2014 upon promulgation of North Carolina's Coal Ash Management Act, or CAMA, followed shortly thereafter by the Federal Coal Combustion Residuals, or CCR, final rule. As I explained in my rebuttal, the company was required to adhere to and apply the accounting guidance under generally accepted accounting principles, specifically Statement of Financial Accounting Standard Number 143, now codified as ASC 410, and provided as my rebuttal Exhibit 1, as well as the FERC Uniform System of Accounts. The company appropriately began its ARO accounting for coal ash costs upon becoming subject to certain legal obligations that triggered the ARO accounting requirements. The specific legal obligations were imposed upon the company by CAMA. The consent agreement entered into between the company and the South Carolina Division of Health and Environmental Control and the CCR final rule. The company determined that the coal ash basins it operated needed to be closed as a result of the consent decree and passage of the CAMA and CCR final rule. Therefore, the company appropriately began its ARO accounting for coal ash costs upon becoming subject to these legal obligations that triggered the ARO accounting requirements. The company's auditors, Deloitte & Touche LLP, performed the annual audit of the company's financial statements in FERC Form 1. Deloitte & Touche has issued its opinion that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in conformity with the U.S. GAAP and the FERC Uniform System of Accounts. Finally, Deloitte & Touche also issues an opinion on internal controls that states that Duke Energy Corporation maintained, in all material respects, effective internal control over financial reporting. This concludes my summary.
Mr. Chairman, the witness is available for cross-examination.
Thank you. I want to make sure I did the exhibits right. You do want to enter them into the record. We marked them, but I don't think we've entered them.
I do.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Chairman.
will enter those exhibits 22 and 23 will be entered into the record.
Thank you.
Okay. I think based on my sheet, we have some limited cross that folks want to do. I'll give everybody a shot. Vote Solar. Okay. NAACP, Coastal Conservation League, Upstate Forever. Sierra Club, Ms. Lee. Energy users. Walmart. ORS. I've heard that before, Mr. Nelson.
I really don't want to ask Mr. Doss too many questions. I'm going to set up a couple basics here, and I think maybe you're the right guy to talk to. You're the infrastructure accounting person. Could you explain a little bit about what your job is at Duke?
Yeah, so the way that we're organized in our accounting department is that I am the head of what's called electric utilities and infrastructure accounting, and that's just think of that as the electric segment. If you read our financial publications that we put out to the SEC, we are organized by segments, business segments, and I am the director of the accounting for the financial reporting, the general accounting for the electric segment, which covers our electric utilities.
So you're intimately familiar with the dollars and cents that are involved in the day-to-day operations of the electric side of Duke, right?
I think that's fair, yes.
Is the company right now, is there any kind of a precarious financial situation? Is there anything particularly difficult in the financial condition of the company?
Could you be more specific? You are talking about, when you say the company, I defined the company here as Duke Energy Carolinas. Are you talking about Duke Energy Corporation?
So I would talk about Duke Energy Carolinas.
Duke Energy Carolinas.
Is it on strong financial footing?
I think it's on strong financial footing. I mean, as you've heard here in this case for South Carolina, our earnings are not where they need to be, and that's why we're here today.
Is there any unusual risks that Duke Energy Carolinas has as far as their operations as compared to other electric utilities, say, in the Southeast?
When you say risks, I think that the risks of any electric utility is, are we going to be able to recover the costs that we've prudently incurred? That's always a risk that we look at. So for Duke Energy Carolinas, it's no different. Whether it's North Carolina or South Carolina, that's one of the risks we look at. Are we going to be able to recover through our rates the costs that we've incurred?
As a comparison, they're like Georgia Power right now. I mean, they're trying to build 2 nuclear plants still down there, right? Isn't that a more risky financial situation for that company right now?
I'm not an expert on Georgia Power, but I've read a little bit enough to know that, yeah, I think that you mentioned the word precarious, maybe in a little bit of a precarious position.
Okay. Thank you. Are you familiar with the deferrals that I was talking about with Ms. Smith the other day?
I am familiar with the deferrals.
Is there some particular reason why Duke Energy now is seeking so many of these deferrals on an ongoing basis?
The deferrals that we've requested in this case are because we've got some costs that are incurred that are not recovered in our current rates. And so that's the reason for really any deferral that we come in for, is that if these are costs that are incremental to what's currently recovered in rates, we come in and ask for a deferral.
But we didn't, or at least I didn't, and I've been in this business for about 15 years at least. I don't recall seeing all these until the last couple of years, and it seems like we're getting a lot of them now, and particularly from Duke. Is there a reason for that?
And I'm going to say that I don't know. I haven't looked back at history to see that we're in an environment now where we're asking for a lot more than maybe we have in the past. What I would say is that these activities, these costs that we've asked for deferral treatment are for costs that are clearly incremental to what we've incurred in the past.
I think that's all I've got. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Williams.
Mr. Doss, the executive summary to your testimony identifies an overall increase in depreciation expense due to capital additions, but a net decrease in depreciation expense for transmission, distribution, and general plan accounts resulting from longer service lives. Is that right?
That's correct.
What was the root cause for these items to have a longer service life?
So these are, when you look at the production assets, we actually had some shorter service lives, right? And we also added Lee CC, which means that we had more production assets in service. When you talk about the transmission, distribution, and other assets, the assessments were, from talking to our operations people and our depreciation consultants, is that some of those assets, we're finding that the lives are actually longer. And the way that we assess that is looking at recent history as far as the recent retirements, recent replacements of those kinds of assets, and just doing a reassessment. The depreciation study is the full 528 pages that's included in my testimony. Is done by actually an external depreciation consultant who does those meetings with our operations people. I can't say I know specifics or specific examples of the root cause of what's driving that, but it's based on a historical analysis.
Okay, thank you. Is the company proposing to take the transmission line out of service that still has a useful service life?
I'm not sure I know which transmission line you're referring to.
Okay. Did the depreciation study identify notable plant items whose useful life is shorter than previously expected?
I think that on the production, or some people call it the generation side, our generation plants, what we found is that since the last depreciation study, which is more than 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, a lot has changed since then, with our coal plants and the projected retirement dates of those plants. So I would answer your question that way, and that, a lot has changed over the last 5 or 6 years since our last study. We are seeing, based on what you've heard here today and yesterday, is that some of these coal plants are going to be retired earlier than maybe we would have expected many years ago. So you would see some shorter depreciable lives.
Were there any surprises from the depreciation study?
I'm not aware of any surprises. And again, I'm kind of at a higher level on this as far as reading through the executive summary and understanding what we heard from our depreciation consultant. I can't say that I'm aware of any surprises.
And I want to ask a question I already asked in a different manner. Are you aware of any transmission lines that the company would propose to take out of service that still has useful service life?
I'm not aware of that. I can't think of anything, but then again, we probably have perhaps some operations witness, although I'm not exactly sure who we have here. But I would say that I'm not aware of a transmission line being pulled out of service.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions? Any redirect, Mr. Marzo?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of quick questions. Mr. Doss, Mr. Nelson had asked you about risk a moment ago. Am I correct that the right witnesses in this case to discuss risk would be Mr. Sullivan and Hebert, Mr. Hebert?
Yes, those would be good witnesses for that.
And that's not the area of accounting that you're testifying to today, correct?
That is correct.
In addition, Mr. Chairman, if I could take a little bit of liberty, earlier this morning, Mr. Robinson, I believe, had referred to a witness later in the proceeding who could address some of the questions that were asked about end-of-life nuclear reserve. And I believe Mr. Doss may be a witness who can help with that. Mr. Doss, there were some questions this morning with the first panel around end-of-life nuclear reserve. I think you may have been here for that. Is that correct?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And I believe one of the questions from more than one commissioner was around the return that may be accrued on that particular reserve for customers. Did you hear those questions?
I did hear those questions.
Could you please give an answer to that question as you understand it coming from the commission?
Yes. With that, if we're collecting money from customers and holding it in a reserve, those customers would receive a return on those amounts.
Thank you, Mr. Doss. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any recross? Okay.
Sorry. So it's a return. How much return, and how is that actually given back to ratepayers?
So the mechanics of this would be that we would establish a regulatory liability as we're collecting those costs. And the way that we build our rates is the regulatory liability is actually a reduction of our rate base. And that's the method through which customers would earn a return on this.
How much of a return? What is that based on? Is that
It would be based on the level of return that we earn on our rate base.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other recross? Okay.
With that return that you just referenced, would it be comparable to return on equity or ROE, or be something else?
I'm going to speculate, and then I'm going to also ask that Kim Smith maybe back me up on this, our rates expert. But when I think of a return, I think of an overall return, which is essentially an average of the two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right. If not, Mr. Doss, we appreciate you being here and appreciate your testimony, and you may step down.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that Mr. Doss be excused.
And you may be excused.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to, never been fussed at for wrapping up early, and we're going to wrap up early, like right now. Today, we will begin again at 10 a.m. on Monday. And with that, if there's nothing else, anything else, we're adjourned. Thank you.